it's not ethical to officially use humans as test subjects. So where does that leave us? Either retroactive studies of human populations who've been exposed to the products over the years, of which there are many in the lawsuits and countrywide bans that go with them, or animal studies. Now, the manufacturers of these pesticides are the ones designing and performing their studies. And the companies claim their products are safe, and often criticize other companies or institutions saying they're not safe by pointing to the fact that, well, that's a rabbit study or a dog study or a frog study, so it doesn't really apply to humans. But the pesticide companies themselves are designing their own studies using rats, frogs, dogs, and rabbits to show that they are safe. So which is it? Either you accept the cellular and molecular observed changes in the tissues and metabolisms in those animals to infer what the effects on humans might be, or you don't. So why are some studies concluding that these products are safe while others are saying otherwise? One of the reasons, and this has to do with the idea that this is pretty crucial, the dose makes the poison, which contends that the greater the dose, the greater the effect. The EPA, the FDA, and the USDA are not protecting us from pesticides in part because they have a different view of toxicity. They are looking to prevent immediate death or acute poisoning symptoms. They are not requiring or performing low-dose exposure studies using the levels found in our environment and in our food. Again, they claim the dose makes the poison. It must be at least this much before it's going to be harmful. But we now know that extremely low doses of these substances are harmful. And because of the way our endocrine system works, these chemicals can mimic real hormones at very low doses, which make them more harmful at low levels. This is a problem when you consider the maximum exposure levels for humans and how they are set by the companies, and then recommended to the EPA, which looks like this. So we have the lethal dose, which kills everything in the study. LD50 kills half. Maximum tolerated dose is still pretty poisonous, high toxicity, but it doesn't kill anything. Then the lowest observed adverse effects level, barely toxic, barely. No observed adverse effect level at the bottom, kills no test subjects. So then they usually will take that no observed effect level and add in a safety buffer of, say, 100, reducing the dose by 100-fold. And that is how they set the human exposure level. That's what they recommend to the EPA. And it's mostly true. The maximum exposure limits are pretty low. And so we don't think we see any effects in humans, or do we? Sorry about that. I want to explain to you guys what that looks like. So before we talk about the health risks, I want to show you how the nonlinear dose response thing works. And that's what it's called when you have high dose, high response, and then it makes a U and goes back up. Even at a low dose, you see a high response. This conflicts with the dose makes the poison ideology and is the reason for such an intense debate between toxicologists and the doctors and researchers in the endocrinology, oncology, and internal medicine communities. So the black shaped U we'll put here, and I'm just going to graph these so you guys can just see real quick. So we'll average that trend in green. And we'll go back to our doses. I'm just going to mark them on here. So lethal, high dose, high response. Still high dose, not as high of a response, kills only half. Maximum tolerated dose, doesn't kill anything. Lowest observable adverse effect level, barely toxic. Then we've got no observable effects down here at the bottom. Then they take that safety buffer, put it way away from the others, so it's way low dose, almost for sure it can't be harmful. But look what happens. This is what happens with endocrine disruptors and hormone hacking chemicals. So rather than the last pink dot being down on the bottom, it really belongs up at the top. Given these complex dose response patterns, picking a dose threshold below which exposure can always be considered safe is simply not possible. Today, in the interest of brevity, I'm only going to talk specifically about one of these chemicals, which is the one I feel poses the biggest and most immediate threat to our health, which is saying a lot since 2,4-D is up there. That's glyphosate. It's the active ingredient in Roundup and now has the distinction of being the most widely applied pesticide in the history of the world. In my opinion, it's the one that's the biggest threat because of the sheer volume being applied to our food crops. It's near indiscriminate use by homeowners and parks officials because of the safe as salt safety claims being made by the manufacturer. 19 countries have banned the use of glyphosate around the world, yet we continue to indiscriminately spray it on the foods we feed to our children and on the environments they spend so much of their time. And the focus on glyphosate is not to diminish the mountains of research on the other pesticides or to give them a pass. It's just it would take me months to go through all of them. So I'm just going to introduce you to glyphosate Bob. He's the tip of the iceberg, the most widely applied herbicide in the world. To the left are all the active ingredients being sprayed on the parks. To the right are the active ingredients being sprayed everywhere else in town. Remember, this whole iceberg only represents active ingredients, not the inner, like POEA, and most often we're not allowed to know what's in the innards because they're proprietary. So how much glyphosate are Americans allowed to get? 0.3 milligrams per kilogram of body weight per day in the EU, 0.8 Australia and Canada, 1.75 in the United States. This is 17 times higher than it was in the 80s. Back then, glyphosate was classified as a possible carcinogen, or class C, based on a long-term feeding study in which male rats developed kidney tumors. Industry pressure has raised it to what it is today. The latest scientific recommendations using all the literature that's available, done by independent scientists, is 0.2025 milligrams per kilogram, which is 12 times lower than the current EU standard and 70 times lower than what we're allowed to take in the US. So, to be clear, I'm not talking about genetically engineered crops or the GMO food debate. More so that the fact that because of these technologies, applications of these pesticides and allowable daily intakes are going to continue to rise, increasing the ubiquity of these residues in our food and our environment. So this is from 96 to 2016, and experts are saying that in this year, 2017, all of these are expected to skyrocket up for quite some time, probably 3 to 4 years. And this is because the EPA has recently approved several crops genetically engineered to survive applications of formulas containing multiple herbicides mixed together. And they will be selling the seeds that go with those. Those are called dual resistance seeds. And these next generation dual resistance GE crops are designed to increase use and reliance on specific new proprietary herbicide formulations. These expectations are based on the company's own sales projections. Because of the emergence of superweeds, around 40 million acres of new GE corn and soybean varieties was planted in 2017 to acreage that will be sprayed with the new proprietary combinations of herbicides. So the companies making these combinations are also the ones engineering the seeds and the plants to withstand them. Monsanto's new line, with their new dual formula of glyphosate combined with 2,4-D, is called Roundup Ready Extend. Dow DuPont seeds will withstand their new chemical called Enlist Duo, which is glyphosate and the very toxic dicamba. Bayer, Syngenta, and BASF are all coming out with seeds and their accompanying new dual resistance chemicals called Extendimax, Ingenia, and Liberty. Until this year, most herbicides in the Midwest were sprayed during a 6-week window, but now the heavy herbicide season will last 4 months, placing more pregnant women and children at a heightened risk and more pesticides directly into the food chain. Experts expect exposure levels to get much worse in the coming 3 years because of this. And the more we learn about the effects of these pesticides on humans, you would think that the maximum residue levels or allowable daily intake would go down, but instead they actually increase. This chart shows the EPA increases in glyphosate tolerance levels in common food crops over the years. So increase, this is parts per million, increase of tolerance levels permitted in food. Increase in 93, small increase on these crops in 2002, big one in 1999 on these, and then another big one in 2017. This demonstrates the urgency and importance now more than ever before of beginning to carve out safe, clean spaces for our children to play and learn as their bodies develop.